Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Brittany Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Engagement at the museum, and it is my privilege to welcome a room full of museum members to this program and to wish you all a very, very happy new year. I'm so glad that you are here tonight. Your attendance at events like these are so important in making our museum a place of gathering for arts and culture. Thank you for your support. We're always looking for ways to reduce barriers for audiences to participate at the museum. So today's program is a test, a shorter 30-minute format, looking closely at a single artwork. Please keep an eye out in your inboxes for a post-event survey. We want your feedback to inform future programming decisions, and staff really do read every comment, myself included. So we have a really, really exciting year ahead for members. We look forward to providing you all with first access to exhibitions on Frida Kahlo this spring, Gustav Caillebotte this summer, and of course, all the other benefits members enjoy year-round. One of my favorites, and yes, I am a member, I will show you my member card in my phone later if you want to see it, is the member bar on the third floor of the Modern Wing, where we have complimentary coffee and tea. And recently we introduced a new menu of food offerings. So I hope if you haven't checked it out, please do, and that I see you up there soon. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenters, Janice Katz and Megan True, for their conversation about how Édouard Manet's Women with Fans embodies Bohemian Paris's fascination with the art and objects of other cultures. As the Roger L. Weston Curator of Japanese Art, Dr. Janice Katz introduces audience to Japanese art and artists through quarterly print rotations in Galleries 107 and exhibitions like 2023's Radical Clay, Contemporary Women Artists from Japan. Janice received her PhD from Princeton University in 2004, and her research focuses on paintings from the Edo period and the history of art collecting in Japan. Assistant in the Department of Painting and Sculpture of Europe. She earned degrees from Butler University and the George Washington University, where she specialized in 19th century French art. She has previously held positions at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, and the Dallas. As we begin, a brief, friendly reminder to please silence your mobile devices, and please join me in welcoming Janice and Megan to the stage. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight. I'm Megan, and I am so excited for this chance to speak with Janice and delve deeper into the context of Édouard Manet's painting, Woman with Fans, which was generously loaned to us by the Musée d'Orsay while our iconic Paris Street Rainy Day is traveling for the exhibition Gustav Caillebotte Painting His World. From my perspective as a specialist in 19th century art, there are many aspects of this painting that I find fascinating, but I am so looking forward to gaining some new insights from a new point of view.
Thank you so much, Megan. Megan's going to be talking about the main aspects of. I will chime in from time to time, and also towards the end talk about what I see as the Japanese elements.
So Manet created this painting in 1873, and although he very carefully composed the scene in his studio, You can see that his style is becoming a lot looser in this period. His brushstrokes are a lot more dramatic, gestural, as he is trying to convey the movement in her clothing and the patterns on the divan, even compared to his well-known painting, The Railway, which was painted in the same year as Woman with Fans. You can tell that he has very deliberately loosened his brushstrokes and is really playing with that impressionistic style. Although her name is not included in the title, the model in this painting is identifiable as the prominent and controversial Parisian socialite Nina de Callias. Born Marie-Anne Gaillard, Nina lived a tumultuous and ultimately short life in the spotlight of Parisian artistic and bohemian society. She married the writer and journalist Hector de Callias when she was young, and much to Hector's exasperation, she continued to be connected to his name even after their speedy separation. Following their short-lived union, Nina alternately went by the names Nina de Callias and Nina de Villard, which was her mother's maiden name. She was quite accomplished in her own right and cultivated a reputation as a poet, a pianist, and a composer. She regularly hosted artistic salons at her home that would become some of the most popular gatherings in Paris at the time, which she continued to host even following the scandal of her separation. Manet was first invited to one of Nina's famous midnight suppers in 1873, the same year that he would invite Nina to come sit with him in his studio. And he would quickly become a regular guest at her home. They were introduced by fellow artist Charles Cros, who was Manet's friend and Nina's current lover. Although his painting was staged in his studio, it really did kind of reflect Nina's personal taste. This painting here is a sketch for Lamy, who was also a regular attendee of Nina's salons. And it is believed to be based off of the gatherings that she would hold at her home. Paintings can be seen on the walls in the background, and a number of round paper lanterns, reminiscent of Asian design, can be seen above where she sits at her piano.
Yeah, the lanterns are definitely reminiscent of Chinese lanterns, if not Chinese lanterns.
I know, it's such a fun little detail. Being a prominent member of Parisian society, Nina was very aware of the fashion and art trends of the time and was not afraid to boldly incorporate them into her own life. In Woman with Fans, she wears a gold feather in her pinned-up hair and a voluminous tulle skirt raised just enough to show off her elaborately embroidered slippers that were likely imported from a foreign country.
Yeah, I took a close look at the slippers, and they're definitely embroidered. They're turned up a bit at the toe, which makes me think that they are either Turkish or maybe from Afghanistan, somewhere in Central or Western Asia, maybe even Moroccan. Probably not East Asian, but very beautiful.
And that's such a great insight because we know that she was very interested in imported fashion. The jacket that she can be seen wearing is identified as an Algerian bolero-style jacket that was a favorite accessory of hers as she was hosting guests at her home. She also chose to wear this jacket for this portrait of her created by Henri Guérard, which accompanied a volume of her poems. Manet really emphasizes her prized imported wardrobe by placing a Japanese screen and an array of fans in the backdrop to Nina's reclining form. And this reflects the fascination with art and cultures of Asian countries, particularly Japan, that would become a trend and style known as Japonisme. Art and objects from Asian countries had been trickling into the European markets for quite some time, but were usually not accessible to the average person. In the mid-19th century, particularly following the Paris Exposition in 1867, which featured a full array of East Asian art, French audiences were more broadly exposed to styles and objects being imported into France, and the trend quickly took hold of Parisian society. Artists were especially drawn to Japanese art and were fascinated with both the delicate beauty and bold graphic styles that were incorporated into Japanese objects. Manet, being a wealthy social man, was aware of this trend very early on. In 1868, only a year after the Paris Exposition, he painted this portrait of his friend, the preeminent author and critic Émile Zola. And in the background of his very artistically cluttered office, we can see the edge of a Japanese screen and a Japanese print above his desk.
Yeah, it's incredible to me because the 1860s would have been a really, really early time to have Japanese items and, to be able to access them, be able to buy them. And when you think of what was going on in Japan at the time, Japan only opened to trade, global trade, in 1859, and that's when the ports were open. So things came in very, very quickly after that point, almost simultaneously with the opening. And by the time you get to the portrait that we're talking about today, into the 1870s, these items were much more accessible. I mean, this is the time right at the end of the shogunate, of what we call the Edo period in Japan. And the emperor was reinstated in 1868. So it's right at the end of that period, right at the legendary kind of opening of Japan to trade. And what's fascinating is how quickly so many of these items flooded into France, Paris, and all of the dealers that were obtaining these items and making them available. Certainly prints, fans, things that were portable were plentiful.
Yes, and by the 1870s, Manet had begun a collection of his own and had begun searching these things out and incorporating them into his studio practice, using them as props in his compositions. In particular, a Japanese screen with a motif of plants and cranes appears in the background of multiple paintings. In 1876, a few years after he used it as a backdrop for Nina's portrait, he would also use it as the background of a portrait of his friend, Stéphane Mallarmé, a poet and critic that he actually met at one of Nina's salons. In this painting, the screen is abstracted even further than in Woman with Fans, primarily showing the gold leaf background with the faint but recognizable pattern of the leaves just to the left of the sitter's head. This familiar pattern also shows up in Manet's 1877 painting, Nana, which depicts a young, high-end courtesan getting ready while her client sits nearby. In this picture, the image of the crane and vegetation that appears on the screen in the background appears to be a nearly exact match to the motif that can be found on the screen in Woman with Fans. However, in this painting, Manet appears to have altered the color of the screen from gold to a blue in order to lighten the composition and draw the eye from the blue of the screen to the pale blue of the young woman's corset and stockings. And of course, Manet was far from the only artist incorporating elements of Japanese art into his work. Many realist and impressionist artists of the time were also catching on to this trend of Japonisme. By the late 1870s, as Janice discussed earlier, imports from East Asian countries became very plentiful and much easier to access, going from a handful of select galleries to being available in department stores. And because of this, the collecting of Japanese art was much more accessible to a general public and would become primarily associated with fashionable Parisian women. The artist James Tissot demonstrated the popularity and ease of access to Asian objects in his painting Young Women Looking at Japanese Objects, which depicts two Parisian women perusing a gallery containing Asian artwork. And Japanese fans in particular became a mark of taste in Paris and were primarily associated with young women. Paintings like Renoir's Woman with a Fan shows how these fans were often carried by women wanting to show off their sense of style. Some of Manet's fellow artists would take this trend of incorporating Japanese objects into their work a little bit further with the commentary on the just utter fascination that many French citizens held for East Asian art and culture. Claude Monet's work, La Japonaise, or Camille Monet in Japanese costume, is a really fascinating example, just really demonstrating the demand that France had for Japanese artwork at that time. The fans are arranged on the wall in this painting in a very similar manner to Woman with Fans. But Monet takes it even a step further by posing his wife in a blonde wig to even further highlight the contrast between her Western identity and her costume of a brilliantly embroidered Japanese kimono. Although many French collectors genuinely held an appreciation for Japanese art, it is clear that the fine line between appreciation and appropriation often blurred and was crossed. In Manet's case, the Japanese and other foreign objects that are incorporated into his painting of Nina not only reflected her personal, slightly eccentric taste, but also served as a sort of counterweight to her scandalous reputation as an independent woman. The foreign elements, along with her relaxed pose, made it possible to kind of distance the painting from the subject herself a bit. When Hector de Callias, Nina's ex-husband, learned of the painting, he wrote to Manet demanding that his name not be connected with the painting in any way. He did not want to be associated with his ex-wife, who he saw as a bit wild and free-spirited. And Manet responded by assuring him that it was not a portrait and that Nina was merely a model for what he called a quote-unquote figure of fantasy. So he was obviously already playing a little fast and loose with what he was working with there. But I'm so interested to hear a little bit more about the other elements that he chose to incorporate in this painting.
Thank you, Megan. It is so wonderful to hear your insights. And as a Japanese art specialist, when I look at this image, I'm coming to it with a different set of associations, different questions. And primarily what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out just what is going on in the background. What are we really looking at through the filter of Manet's very loose brushwork? So, of course, he has taken artistic license with the objects in his studio and interpreted them in a way that is definitely not based solely in reality. But still, I try to identify objects that I see in the background with Japanese art objects that I'm familiar with. So, first of all, the fans themselves, I believe, are affixed to the wall in back. I believe that these were complete fans, complete with the ribs on them, actual objects, fans that were affixed to the back wall. And the fans seem like everyday objects to me. These could be even souvenirs that would have been readily available in Japan or in Paris. And they're all of the uchiwa type, so the round, flat fan type, not the folded fan type. And looking through the filter of the very impressionistic brushwork, I have a few guesses on what the subject matter of the fans are.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear a little bit more about the shape of the fan and the significance that that had in Japan. These round fans tended to be the more popular type in Paris because they were obviously marked as different. The folding fan format was already pretty common in Europe, so it wasn't quite as exciting to Parisians as the round painted fans.
That is such an amazing insight that I hadn't even considered. So the fan that you see on the far left, it looks like a scene of a boat on water. Then it looks to me like there's something going on the bow of the boat. It's really hard to make out. But when I look at this, what immediately comes to mind are scenes from Japanese painting of cormorant fishing. That's fishing with cormorant birds. The birds would be in the water. Usually it's at night, and there is some kind of flame lit, some kind of torch on the bow of the boat. And so I want to think that this is the scene that we're looking at. And next to it, the smaller fan is of a type that I'm showing you images of that are these smaller format round fans that were readily available. And the subject matter there is the wisteria maiden, young woman with a distinctive hat with wisteria around her. And I'm showing you a print of that just beneath those fans laid out. And again, it's a very common kind of folk figure. And the fan that's by the sitter's head looks to me to be of flowers, blue and white flowers. Perhaps these are irises, or maybe they're morning glories. But again, a subject that you would encounter very often on Japanese fans. And so I just give you one example there. It's been so fun to try and figure out what the subject matter of the fans could possibly be. Thank you. So by arranging fans on the wall in a floating pattern, as if the fans were randomly being scattered in the wind, Manet is evoking the kind of fan paintings in Japan that had been popular for centuries, such as this one that I'm showing you from the workshop of an artist called Sotatsu. Now, this is very well-known fan painting. It's in the National Museum of Asian Art, and it dates to the 17th century. All of the fans that are pasted onto the folding screen, the gold leaf folding screen, are painted, and they are arranged more or less to look as if they are, in a random pattern. And aside from being a really beautiful motif of scattered fans, compositions like this had a practical purpose in that it showed the range of subjects and the range of talent that was available in a particular painting studio. In this case, Sotatsu's studio was known as one of the premier places that produced fans in Kyoto in the 17th century. And you can see different hands at work on the painted fans, different subjects, of course. Also, each fan has a seal from a different artist. So this would have been Sotatsu and his, very high-level apprentices who were doing this kind of fan painting. So this is different from what we were looking at in Manet's portrait, because the fans here have been, the paper that has been painted on has been pasted flat onto the screen surface, and the ribs or the sticks, the bamboo sticks, are not actual sticks. They are painted on to look like they're sticks. So it's this kind of illusion, that's being done here. But the surface of this is quite flat. It's not as if actual fans have been affixed to the back wall or to a surface. So this is one famous example, but the subject continued to be popular into Manet's time and beyond.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear that these motifs of fans draped across the background of a screen not only was common in Japan, but served such a practical purpose for these artists' workshops and their apprentices. And I just find that so interesting that artists like Manet saw that and adapted that into their own work as a way to kind of add a little bit more depth and texture to their backgrounds, really using them as purely decorative items.
He clearly knew about this motif.
Oh, definitely.
I would say. So here I'm showing you a 19th century example that was in an exhibition that we had here at the Art Institute in 2009, and it's in the St. Louis Art Museum. And it shows scattered fans being blown by the wind and descending down towards a stream. The inclusion of a stream of water is very common in these compositions of floating fans. And what I love about this one is that you see many of the fans are half closed or entirely closed, and that, really, I think, enhances the illusion. And again, the background is largely gold leaf. And screens like this would have been used in interiors in Japan. Screens can be used in order to separate a smaller area from a larger one in a large room, or sometimes screens were used to highlight a specific individual, somebody of importance, by having a decorative screen behind them. But what can definitely be said about this motif is that it is extremely decorative. And because the fans carry imagery from all different seasons, it's also the kind of composition that would be appropriate to use and to show all year round. Thank you. And what's interesting to me is that Manet has seemingly taken these fans and affix them to the back onto an already painted gold leaf screen. I don't think that the composition would have, originally the Japanese composition would have included the fans. I definitely think that the fans, were affixed to a screen whose subject matter was birds and flowers. But the underlying, if you can just go back, the underlying Japanese screen in the painting is absolutely fascinating to me. I have circled this one area which really raised question marks in my mind, because to me that looks like the place where two sides of a folding screen have been flattened and then mounted next to one another onto a wall. And the reason why I say that is because what I believe we're looking at is the brocade mounting on a Japanese screen, which Manet has actually, he has portrayed really faithfully, I think. And it was very easy for me to identify this. So it looks like brocade that's done in two different colors. There is on the border of the painting, there is a narrow strip, and then a wider strip at the edge. And these would have been two different colors of brocade. And this is exactly how a Japanese screen is framed. And you can see from the next example, here I'm showing you a 19th century Japanese screen where the two colors of brocade and the mounting are very clearly distinguished. And in addition to that mounting on the outside of a Japanese screen, you would have a lacquer frame. And that lacquer frame would allow the screen to be a freestanding object. So whether it's folded or whether it's stretched flat, it was an object in its own right. And what's interesting to me is that in Manet's painting, you don't see the lacquer frame on the outside. So has he cut out the painting and the brocade and then affixed it to the wall like wallpaper? That would be difficult to do without damaging the painting, but I guess it is possible. So, I still have a few questions in my mind about that. And I agree with Megan that the wall painting that we're looking at, supposedly from a screen, was originally gold leaf in the background, not blue, even though the color was likely changed, as you say, for the other painting in order to go along with the color scheme. And there are a couple of things that I still have questions about. You might notice that above Nina's head, there are some more verticals, right? And it almost looks, I hope you can see that in the slide, and it almost looks like narrow paintings have been affixed to the wall side by side, a series of narrow paintings. But I really don't think that's the case. I think that this is probably a bit of artistic license that Manet took, and perhaps he wanted to add extra verticals by her head in order to divide up the composition or to even emphasize where her face is in the composition. I do think it is a continuous screen, Japanese screen painting composition that has been stretched flat and perhaps taken out of its frame and affixed to the wall. But still, it is difficult to tell, but these are my best interpretations.
No, yeah, those observations are so interesting and something that we wouldn't normally really think about as we are studying it from a 19th century French perspective. And I feel like that the way that Manet would use these objects in his studio practice really does merit further study, because those questions are just so interesting, and there's so much more to learn about this painting.
Yes, I agree. We've only skimmed the surface, but we very much look forward to your questions and being able to discuss other aspects that we weren't able to bring up.